Good evening, Shalom. Welcome to this episode here of the Watchdog. I am your host, C.Jay Cox, and this is a special, sort of, in the sense that we didn't actually have an episode last week, so instead of just having our normal Wednesday and or Thursday episode, we're also going to have an episode uploaded here tonight, which is a Monday night, for those of you who may be wondering. So, how's it going, Shalom? Welcome to this Monday night, June 17th, 2019. Hope you all are doing well. I got a few important topics that I think I want to talk about today. But before we get into the articles, we're just going to have a brief discussion about something. So recently, this last Flag Day, for those of you who may not know, June 14th is Flag Day. It's also, by the way, the birthday of the United States Army. June 14th, 1775 is when the Continental Army came into being. But at any rate, this last Flag Day, it was proposed, by a Republican congressman that we should make it illegal to start burning the American flag. This was later endorsed by President Donald Trump and then endorsed by many other conservative pundits, some of the more popular being Candace Owens and Charlie Kirk, but there were definitely others. And this is a common talking point amongst people on the conservative side, has been for a long time, the idea that we should make it illegal to burn the United States flag. So this isn't anything new in that sense, right? It's just a reiteration of an old school conservative talking point. Now, I am traditionally on the side of conservatives, and I am definitely an American patriot. Flag Day is one of my favorite holidays, just to be clear. And, I do love that flag. I love the songs about that flag. I love this country. I love the 4th of July. I love all the freedoms we have in the Constitution and all that kind of stuff. And that's exactly why I have to say I'm incredibly disappointed in any conservative, anybody who could dare call themselves a conservative, who would say that they would want to endorse this kind of a law. That it is very, very dangerous, in my own opinion, when you start making certain kinds of speech and certain kinds of actions that are not harmful to anybody, which we've kind of classified as speech, as illegal, regardless of how offensive they might be. Now, I hate the idea of flag burning. I do want to make perfectly clear. I think it is unnecessarily hostile, and I think it is disrespectful to what is easily the greatest country in the world. Probably in world history, but I'm sure that's debatable. I think it's a little ridiculous from the perspective of, there's a lot of people who seem to hate this country and yet have no intentions of leaving or going anywhere else. And I think it's ridiculous from a freedom perspective, considering we're in a country that actually gives you the right to do that in the first place. And et cetera. I mean, there's a bunch of reasons to hate the idea of flag burning, and I certainly do. But making flag burning illegal, I think, is not justifiable. I don't think it's justifiable from a constitutional perspective. I don't think it's justifiable from a moral perspective. I think the argument is you are tarnishing a symbol that is considered sacred by some, by many even, tarnishing a symbol of the freedoms that you have in this country that represents your nation, and it's tantamount to treason. However, I would quickly point out that the United States of America has often been very lenient with so-called traitors in the efforts to kind of preserve our own brotherhood amongst the citizens, right? The famous example being after the United States Civil War, of course, when Abraham Lincoln, or it might have been Andrew Johnson, actually. I'm pretty sure it was Lincoln, though. Nonetheless, the Union pardoned all of the generals and politicians and soldiers in the Confederate Army and decided that they were going to reinstate the states in, as kind of peaceful a manner as possible, and going against the radical Republican idea at the time, which was to basically treat the South as if it were a conquered war territory. But less famous examples would include George Washington, when he pardoned the leaders of the Whiskey Rebellion, using the presidential pardon. It wasn't like a court or anything like that, but like actually pardoned them. And then, obviously, we've had the calls for leniency when it comes to people like, what's his name? Sorry, I'm having a blank here, because I'm thinking Julian Assange, but it's not. Edward Snowden, that's who it is. Yeah. And that's not something that we've actually had done yet, but it is just an example of like the mentality we've had here in the United States. Although you'd be hard pressed to call Edward Snowden a traitor. Nonetheless, the point being, right, this is a historical precedent, and it's a good one. It's one that I think has made our country, have a forgiving spirit about it. So that's the first thing I would point out. The second thing I would point out, whilst I wouldn't necessarily classify it as free speech per se, because speech is technically talking, you're not talking. It's the same argument I've made for why freeing the nipple is not classified under free speech. With that said, though, I do think there is a certain level of free political expression in burning the United States flag, that since it does not harm anyone, and since it is not against, the generally accepted moral code, as, going outside with your shirt off is, for example, I don't think it should be made illegal. Like I said, I certainly disagree with it, but I just don't think you have any grounds, constitutionally speaking or morally speaking, to actually make it a crime. And to kind of use another really good example, some people would consider it to be a sacred symbol. I definitely wouldn't, but I do know that a lot of people tarnish a lot of sacred things in the United States of America, things that I definitely would consider sacred all the time, such as the constant butchering of Bible verses and using them for somebody's own, personal gain in a movie, in media all the time, in music and television shows and movies and cartoons and etc. Right? But should those things be made illegal? Well, of course not. And I think the same thing applies here. And there's other examples that you can use there. But the point is, I just do not think that there is any reason to be making burning the flag illegal. I think that is definitely protected. And even if you made the argument that it wasn't protected under being speech, since it's technically an action and not a speech, I would still say that it's protected as a form of political expression, in a more de facto way than de jure way in that particular sense. And I think there is it would be kind of hypocritical in a lot of ways for a lot of conservatives to say that this is something that should be made illegal. And I'll use an example to kind of speak to something that's going on right now. This Kyle Khrushchev, or whatever his last name is, character, one of the survivors of the Parkland shooting, right? And he's been a pro Second Amendment advocate. He made some tweets where he used a lot of racial slurs, and he was about 16 at the time. It was about 2 years, I think, ago, 2 or 3 years ago. Made a bunch of tweets where he used a bunch of racial slurs. I don't really know what the context was, but I do believe that they were joking, but definitely joking in bad taste, which of course a lot of joking is. And he got rejected from Harvard as a result, which is kind of ridiculous. I don't think that your personal political views should be grounds for you to be rejected from Harvard, personally. That's just my own personal opinion. I think any university that's going to get any sort of public funding should just straight up not have that right. Now, if Harvard is a private university, which I will admit you have a little bit of ignorance in that particular regard, then I guess I don't actually have a problem with this in that sense, though I do still think it is a little bit harsh. But from a legal perspective, if they do receive any sort of funding from the federal government, I do think that should be cut immediately if they're going to be deciding that certain forms of ideology, which I don't think you could make an argument this was racist ideology. Anyways, it's very clearly jokes and bad taste. However, that certain ideology is grounds for being suspended and or not accepted into the school. I just don't think you should be receiving any funding for that. However, with that being said, right, there are a lot of conservatives who are defending Mr. Kyle on this situation, as they should, because it's not fair to use somebody's ideas to destroy their career. Right? It's not fair to use somebody's mistakes to destroy their career. It's not fair to use somebody's jokes to destroy their career. Right? If David Duke, who is a legitimate racist, somebody who definitely thinks white people are better than other people, right? If he wants to go to Harvard, and he's qualified to go to Harvard, then if Harvard is giving out, if Harvard is taking public money, rather, he should be allowed to go to Harvard. Right? If it's a private school, then that's completely different. And again, I'm not entirely sure about Harvard. I don't know too much about Harvard, so it might actually be a private school. The only reason I even bring this up in the first place is just to say I find it ironic that these are both going on at the same time. This whole Kyle Khrushchev, or whatever his last name is, situation, as well as the whole flag burning thing. They're happening at the same time. And it's very interesting to me to see people who say, well, flag burning should be illegal, then turn around and say this university should not be, rejecting Kyle based off of Kyle, whatever, I'm going to call him Kyle K. Kyle K's, application to be in this institution because of some of the things he said. I personally think that's very hypocritical. Now, I agree that he shouldn't have been rejected based off of these unsavory tweets. I happen to, however, as we already established, think that you're completely high if you want to arrest people who are burning the American flag. So I, dare I say, I'm being consistent here. Whereas a lot of these conservatives are definitely not being consistent here. And it disappoints me. It definitely disappoints me. And I think one of the bigger reasons that it is disappointing me is because there seems to be a new sort of conservatism that neoconservatism seems to be dying out, and that was always the establishment sort of totalitarian and statist kind of conservatism. It almost seems to be being replaced with something that is equally as statist when it fits when the consequences and surrounding situations fit its agenda. And I don't know exactly what I would call it, but it's conservatives like Rex Jones, Alex Jones' son, and Mark Dice, right, and Candace Owens, and a lot of people who I actually really like. In fact, all the three people I just mentioned I definitely like. But when you say you should start regulating social media, when you keep constantly saying Trump is doing good, Trump is doing all this sort of great stuff, when Trump does nothing to help, and shout out to Paul Joseph Watson for finally getting it, right? In his recent video when he was talking about social media censorship, Trump is not going to do anything about it, right? We need to make new platforms. I mean, thank you, PJW. That was like one of the greatest videos I saw, finally somebody getting it. But anyways, a lot of conservatives out there who seem to be perfectly fine with the state interacting with other people's lives whenever it fits their agenda. And I don't like that. So, to wrap up, don't ban the American flags burning. Yes, it's messed up. You shouldn't do it. It's very unpatriotic. I personally hate it. It even kind of makes me, literally angry. But it should not be illegal. People have the right to have infuriating opinions and even enact infuriating actions. But anyways, Australia bans for all purchases bans cash, for all purchases over $10,000 starting July 2019. Now, you may notice this is from May 12th of 2018. However, what's coming in 1 month? In fact, really in 2 weeks. July of 2019. So I figured I would like to remind everybody about this. Australia bans cash for all purchases over $10,000 starting July 2019. And as the different nations of the world try to force us towards a cashless society, you'll see more and more laws like this, certainly. I think America will be one of the last areas in the world to have laws like this, but they are definitely coming. Australia's Liberal Party government has announced that it will soon be illegal to purchase anything over $10,000 with cash. The government says it's encouraging the transition to a digital society and cracking down on tax evasion, but not everyone is happy with the move. Quote, "This will be bad news for criminal gangs, terrorists, and those who are just trying to cheat on their tax or get a discount for letting someone else cheat on their tax," end quote, Treasurer Scott Morrison said in the speech announcing the government's new budget. Quote, "It's not clever, it's not okay, it's a crime," end quote. The ban starts on July 1st, 2019. It is currently June 17th, 2019. The ban starts on July 1st, 2019, and any payment over $10,000 will have to be made by check or credit/debit card. The government will encourage the measure by allocating roughly $300 million for what it calls the Black Economy Standing Task Force. The goal is to drum up about $3 billion in new tax revenue over the next 4 years. And of course, the goal is to get more tax revenue. Why would it not be? Politicians always trying to line their pockets because they're greedy. Thus is the way of the world, I suppose. As the Guardian this is from Gizmodo, by the way. As the Guardian points out, one of the biggest targets for the new task force will be the illicit tobacco trade. Australia has the highest tax on cigarettes in the world, with an average pack costing about $40. $40 to get a pack of cigarettes. That is completely insane. right? They're somewhere between $5 and $15 here in the States, depending on what state you're in. I mean, of course, there's a huge black market for them, right? That's completely ridiculous. A pack of cigarettes costs like 50 cents to make. That's exaggeratory, but it is very cheap. But there's a huge black market for cigarettes, which comes from both stolen goods and smuggling from outside the country. Taxes aren't paid on cigarettes until the point of sale, so theft from tobacco warehouses is unusually common in Australia. Australians have a strange relationship with cash. Strange in the sense that they still use it. Roughly 37% of all commercial transactions in Australia is made using cash. That number is just 32% in the US and 15% in Sweden. Many Swedes are angry about how its slow move, to cashless society. Let me restart that. Many Swedes are angry about its slow move to a cashless society, arguing that going completely digital causes security concerns. And India began phasing out a whopping 86% of its currency in November of 2016 by invalidating $500 and $1,000 notes as legal tender. Or I don't know what they're called in India, but they're equivalent of a dollar. There are also regional quirks that make the Australian government more prone to crack down on cash. For instance, it's almost impossible to find a $100 note in circulation in Australia. The Reserve Bank of Australia still prints the $100, so where do they all go? The rarity of the $100 note, nicknamed the Kermit for its green color, is attributed to both massive hoarding overseas as well as being the preferred method of payment for organized crime in Australia. Some Australian economists have even floated the idea of phasing out the Kermit, but there's been significant pushback from the public. And there definitely should be, because the thing about a cashless society is you get closer and closer to a society, first off, where the money doesn't actually exist. Now, right now, money is obviously a funky thing. And without getting too deep into it, there is a certain level of non-existence in money in the sense that it isn't worth anything, objectively or intrinsically, as economists would say. But it is still a physical thing, right? Coinage and the dollar are still something that you can actually give somebody physically as legal tender with a certain value attributed to it for whatever product you happen to be trying to purchase at that time. The closer we get to a cashless society, the closer we get to that not being the case. And I don't really know how well the economy will actually be able to take that. There was a lot of people who consider the economy, including a lot of people in the Keynesian economics field, who consider the economy to be based primarily off of faith. Basically what that means is that so long as people have faith in the currency that they are using, the currency will still be used and the economy can continue to move so long as money is going in circulation. I happen to agree with a lot of aspects of that, and I also happen to think it's going to be incredibly hard for people to have faith in money that literally does not exist. That's like a point system in Call of Duty or something like that. On top of that, I do think a cashless society is much easier to control. Whether it is in the form of like credit cards or forcing everybody to be on the internet, which is currently owned by the United Nations, or the idea of possibly giving people RFID chips that they will go around and purchase with, which is actually happening in countries like Estonia. So that's not just some kind of science fiction or Christian Book of Revelation fiction kind of thing. That's something that actually happens in the world today, right? Those are things that will start happening more and more if people phase to a cashless society, especially considering that the idea of a cashless society is security. And what's the most secure way to ensure nobody's taking any of your information, at least allegedly? Well, it would be having it on you at all times and not tangible so that somebody can't take it from you, such as a chip, which is tangible in the sense that it is physical, but it's inside of your body, right? Or such as something digital. How well that works? Well, a lot of things work in theory. I don't think it'll work at all. I think it'll be a very good way for people to control us. I think cash is really... I would advise that you make all of your purchases in cash if you can. All purchases that you can make in cash, you should make in cash, because I don't think it is a good idea for us to contribute to the idea of cashless society. Moving away from the gold standard was obviously problematic, but now we're getting so far that we're literally just going to be making up numbers, which is, to a certain extent, the Federal Reserve is kind of already doing anyway. I mean, they print money at a whim, they set the interest rate or whatever they feel like. But I don't like this. I think this is terrible. By the way, fun fact for all you guys, Watchdog is actually misspelled on Watchdog down there. So if anybody wants to have a go at me in the comment section, feel free to do that, because that's pretty funny. Anyways, though, I don't like this, and I understand why people would have a push against this, because and by the way, here's the other thing too. Hackers. People like to say that we are digitally secure, but digitally secure is kind of an oxymoron. I advise you, if any of you guys are interested, to watch the game theory video on watch_dogs. It's kind of terrifying. Game theory is that, it's a YouTuber named MatPat. It's very fun if you're interested in it. Hashtag not sponsored. However, the point of wanting you guys to watch that video in particular is, you would be surprised what you can hack into and how much damage you can cause. It's completely insane. And it's something that I think is going to happen quite frequently the closer we get to a cashless society and everything being digitized and things like that. But at any rate, while the ban on cash purchases over $10,000 may not seem like a big deal for the average person, plenty of small businesses, are upset about the plan. Whew. Quote, "It's going to screw me. 95% of my business is cash collections," end quote. Paul Thomas, owner of Commander Security Services in Sydney, told News Corp this week. Quote, "On a monthly basis, we could process and move up to $4 to $5 million, either picking up cash, processing, and EFTing it to customers' accounts, or recarrying it from customers to their bank branch," end quote. Sorry for the weird reading there. "Today, it's any sum over $10,000 in Australia, but anyone with their eyes open can see where this is going. We should expect governments to move away from cash over the next decade, just as currency anarchists continue to insist that cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin and Ethereum, are the real future. Researchers in the 1970s predicted that a widespread debit card system would be the perfect surveillance tool, but they weren't exactly wrong. What they didn't predict was what happens when a completely digital economy gets hacked. Equifax recent loss of so much personal data on virtually half of all Americans could feel just like a prelude to many more snafus to come." News Corp and The Guardian. And News Corp and The Guardian and Gizmodo definitely know what they are talking about on this particular issue. I applaud you guys. I don't understand how people could think this is a good idea, but there are a lot of people who do. A lot of them happen to be, conservatives and libertarians and economic anarchists and things like that. And I think they're completely wrong. I think this is a perfect way to get yourself very, very, very controlled, watched, and hacked into constantly, and make the money worth virtually nothing and all these other kinds of things. I just think it's going to be problematic, and I don't think it's a good idea. And something that a lot of people are refusing to talk about that is very similar to this is there is a lot of different ways they are getting, they are cracking down further and further on us, trying to make sure that we are being tracked constantly. Remember, on October 1st of 2020, the Real ID Act goes into effect, stating that you must have a card with a star ID on it, basically a permit, in order to enter any federal facility or fly commercially in your own nation, your own country. You want to fly from Boise to Las Vegas? Guess what? You need a passport. And that is completely ridiculous, but it's a very good way to make sure you're being tracked and controlled, as is a cashless society and all these other different ways that they're trying to move us further down a digital route. It's not that the internet and digital products are in and of themselves evil. It is when you take an entire society and base it off of these extreme technological advances like robotics and artificial intelligence and digital media and things like that. It can end up upending the system if you don't do it the proper way. That's just inevitable, in my opinion. If you don't go about it the proper way, it is inevitable that it gets upended. And it's terrifying. It's very terrifying. It's not something that I think would be good at all. But nonetheless, I'm going to go ahead and continue here. We got about 36-ish minutes left. Get yourself some chamomile tea. Stuff is bomb. Anyways, so Japanese oil tanker owner disagrees with U.S. military that a mine caused the blast near Iran. Amanda Macias. This is CNBC. Many of you may have heard, many of you may have not, but a oil tanker blew up near Iran, and a lot of people, or Iran, sorry, however you say that, I'm pretty sure it's Iran. And a lot of people, including President Trump, including Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and including the National Security Advisor, the scandalous, war-hungry John Bolton, they say that Iran is the cause of this explosion, and that, you know, something needs to be done about it. We need to attack Iran, blah, 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 blah. Excuse me, blah, blah. To be perfectly frank, there is very little to no evidence that Iran had anything to do with this bombing. More evidence has been coming out to suggest that this is some kind of, if not an outright false flag, then a misunderstanding at least. And one of the people who is actually suggesting that this is either a misunderstanding or an outright lie is the person who actually owned the oil tanker which blew up in the first place, as you can see here. And one of the reasons I point this out is because I think we're under an administration right now that definitely seems to be gung-ho with bombing people. And I do not approve. Let me be perfectly frank. I am certainly of the position that if a nation wants to mess with the United States, they should understand that it will cost them severely, preferably their entire government. Like, we should go to war with the intention of destroying our enemies. But I don't think we should be gung-ho about going to war. If we're going to go to war, we should allow ourselves to be attacked first so that we have the moral justification. We should allow ourselves to be in the right 100% of the time. We should make sure that we're not putting countries under our thumb, right, and staying there for decades on end. And that is not what we do currently. And I think you can kind of see in a lot of our recent wars that we have a propensity to get in wars that we have no business being in. And occasionally we have a propensity to get in wars that we have no business being in because of outright lies. For example, WMDs in Iraq, and for example, the Bay of Tonkin incident in Vietnam. So I just want to make sure that everybody knows that we need to be watching very, very, very hard, very, what's the word there? I don't know. It'll come to me. Investigatively, I guess you could say. We need to be making sure we are constantly on the lookout for these war hawks, because these people want us to be in conflict, either for monetary purposes or for their own reasons of empire. Maybe they think that it's the only way that we can actually make sure that we're free, right? Maybe they legitimately think that we need to have an empire that's going around with a big stick hitting everybody over the head in order for us to preserve our freedoms here. In a lot of situations, I think that it's the military-industrial complex, right? It's the idea that war makes money, at least for certain sectors of the government and certain sectors of the corporations. Something which a former president, Dwight D. Eisenhower, also a former general, warned us about, as well as Smedley Butler, the two-time Medal of Honor winner, and a national hero for sure, even though he was actually a socialist. But that was before people were aware of the evils of socialism, I think. Anyways, the Japanese owner of one of the oil tankers attacked near Iran on Thursday says the vessel was struck by a projectile and not by a mine. We received reports that something flew toward the ship, says Yukata Kitada, president of Kakuga Sangyo. On Thursday, U.S. Central Command said that the Japanese oil tanker Kakuga Courageous had an unexploded limpet mine on their hull following an initial explosion. The Japanese owner of one of the oil tankers attacked near Iran on Thursday said the vessel was struck by a projectile and not by a mine, which is what U.S. officials assessed as the source of the blast. Quote, we received reports that something flew toward the ship, end quote, Yukata Kitada, president of Kakuga Sangyo, said at a press conference Friday. Quote, I do not think there was a time bomb or an object attached to the ship, end quote, he said, adding that a projectile landed above the waterline. On Thursday, U.S. Central Command said in a statement that the Japanese oil tanker Kakuga Courageous had an, quote, unexploded limpet mine on their hull following an initial explosion, end quote. The Pentagon did not immediately respond to CNBC's request for comment. President Donald Trump said Friday that if Iran were to block the Strait of Hormuz, quote, it's not going to be closed for long, end quote, but did not elaborate on what potential steps the U.S. would take in response. Quote, they're not going to be closing the strait, Trump reiterated, in a phone interview with Fox and Friends. Earlier this year, Iran threatened to close the strait in response to a U.S. decision to end waivers on reimposed sanctions for companies that export oil from Iran. The Strait of Hormuz is the world's most important oil choke point. It's a gateway for almost a third of all seaborne crude oil. America's top diplomat, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, blamed Iran for Thursday's attacks without citing specific evidence as to why Tehran was responsible. Quote, Iran is lashing out because the regime wants our successful maximum pressure campaign lifted, end quote, Pompeo said Thursday. Quote, no economic sanctions entitled the Islamic Republic to attack innocent civilians, disrupt global oil markets, and engage in nuclear blackmail, end quote. Quote, the international community condemns Iran's assault on the freedom of navigation and the targeting of innocent civilians, end quote, he said, adding that the U.S. will defend its forces, interests, and partners. And, of course, Iran has since, and I say of course because this should be obvious to anybody who's paying attention, has since threatened to pull out of the Iran deal with the rest of the nations of the world. Some people think this is a big deal. I personally don't really see what the big deal is because I don't think Iran was going to follow the deal in the first place, nor do I think we should have been actually, being okay with them having nuclear power anyways. But nonetheless, I do think we are getting to a point, once again, where you're starting to see escalation of tensions in Iran. And, of course, we have reported numerous times in numerous different years escalation of tensions with Iran because it's something that seems to be pretty well constant. Everybody always wants to have some sort of a war with someone, whether it's Venezuela or North Korea or China or Iran or whatever. And, sometimes there is certainly justification to go to war. I personally think that when China attacked us, digitally speaking, that was justification to go to war. And we didn't. And I was disappointed in that because I think we let China get away with far too much. In this situation, though, we are jumping to conclusions very coincidentally quickly, I think, considering how many people in the current administration have been, very, very adamant about their want to remove the Islamic Republic from the global political sphere. Which I don't think is our right to do unless they are attacking us or a threat to our national sovereignty. I don't think that is our right to do. If we want to support another nation that does it, if Israel wants to do it because Israel finds them to be a threat to their national sovereignty, which I think they are a threat to Israel's national sovereignty, that's fine. Or if the Saudis want to do it because the Saudis think that they're a threat to their national sovereignty, which they are, then that's fine. But for us to be doing it, the Iranians have done nothing to us. There is no reason for us to be going out of our way to try and start another conflict. You realize that we have been at war for my entire life? It's 21 years, consistently. You realize we've been in war, if you count the drug war and the war on terror, which are certainly wars, we've been at war for all but 4 years in the last, 75? Since 1939. Let's see, what is that? 1939? That'd be 80 years, actually. It'd be 80 years now. 80 years! Right? I guess, technically 78 years. We did get involved in World War II in 1941. But at any rate, you see the point. It's nearly 80 years. Right? It's over 75 years. Constantly at war. Constantly at war. Vietnam War, Grenada, Korea, right? Going over to Panama, going into Syria, going into Iraq again, going into Afghanistan. We have people in 90 or 95 different countries, including freaking Germany. Hitler's dead. Fun fact. I know that's a mind-blowing concept, but yeah, Hitler died in 1945. What? I know. The Cold War's been over since, Reagan, literally. We have people in Japan, right? I actually had a cousin who got sent over to Honduras. Honduras? What the hell are you in Honduras for? We've never even been to war with Honduras. I don't even think Honduras is involved in the drug war, for crying out loud. What conceivable reason is there to be in Honduras? I'll tell you what conceivable reason there is. None. But we're there because we have a military-industrial complex. We have a little mini empire that the people of America consistently vote for. And I'm going to put this on you, America, because you are responsible for what your government does. Okay? Just like you're responsible for the way the market goes. The thing about capitalism, the thing about being able to vote, the thing about having freedom is the responsibility falls on you. You voted for Trump, for Obama, for the Bushes, for Clinton. You voted for Pelosi. You voted for Boner, or however you say his last name. You voted for Ryan, right, and for Harry Reid, and for all the other different leaders, right? These are the people that you guys have voted for. And these are the people who want us to consistently go to war. So if you don't want us consistently going to war, vote for people who don't want to go to war. Go and vote in your local primary. Vote for a third-party candidate if that's necessary. Vote for somebody who's an independent if that's necessary. That's actually probably the better thing to do because it's not one of the two big gangs. But anyways, vote for somebody at least, right? Anyways, I don't want to be getting involved in another war. That's my point. Unless we need to. If we need to, then so be it. I guess, push comes to shove, there's not much you can do. Life comes to chat. But I don't want to. Right? I want to have peace. I'm, bare minimum peace in my own country. Not real keen on the idea that global peace is possible, but, I think we can get close by just leaving each other alone, stopping with all the globalist and imperialist nonsense, and just being like, hey, you guys over there in whatever country you're in, have fun in that country. Do whatever the hell it is that you want to do. Over here at the Daily Wire, we got a different article from Amanda Prestigiacomo or something like that. I have no idea how to say that last name, so I'm very sorry. But anyways, Jordan Peterson is launching a censorship-free platform, called ThinkSpot. And here's what we know. Author and clinical psychologist Dr. Jordan B. Peterson confirmed the beta testing of an upcoming free speech-friendly platform he's called ThinkSpot, which he teased during a podcast this week. 1 second. I'm going to pause this trash Joe Biden meme, or whatever it is. Quote, per the Joe Rogan podcast this week, I am backing a new platform called ThinkSpot, currently in beta, end quote. He announced via Twitter on Monday, quote, get on the wait list here. Exciting announcements coming very soon. Per the Joe Rogan podcast, he has the link right here. I'll be sharing the link in the description below. That is the whole article here, but I just wanted to let you guys know about that because... and this is a perfect opportunity to say this, we need to start using new platforms. I obviously gave a shout out to Paul Joseph Watson earlier because he has been saying we're going to have new platforms. He's actually trying to form a new platform. Get on new platforms. Let's get new YouTubes, new Facebooks, new different forms of social media so that we can make sure that the totalitarians do not have control of the market. Just like I said, it is our job to vote for the proper politicians. It is also our job to buy from and use the products of the proper capitalists. So do that. Get on Gab. Get on the wait list for ThinkSpot. We're going to have it in the description below. We're also going to have this article in the description below. Get on BitChute. Get on Minds. Get on all these different places that are going to ensure that we are not beholden to the overlords of tech censorship. Now what we're going to do is we're going to watch a video. Because another one of the presidential candidates for the Democratic Party has decided that they're going to say something that's completely ridiculous and utterly tyrannical. So let's go ahead and watch, shall we?
There's some issues that have such moral clarity that we have as a society decided that the other side is not acceptable. Imagine saying that it's okay to appoint a judge who's racist or anti-Semitic or homophobic. Asking someone to appoint someone who takes away basic human rights of any group of people in America. I think that I don't think those are political issues anymore.
Okay, now we're going to pause this real quick. First off, I forgot to give a name drop here. This is Dr. Michael Brown, Line of Fire. It is a Christian apologetics radio program. Very good radio program, by the way, if you're interested. And the person talking is Kirsten Gillibrand, and she's an idiot. And this idiot has actually decided in her own feeble little mind that it is completely beyond the pale of rational discussion to say that you should not be able to dismember babies and kill them. You'll notice also that she says the same thing about saying that traditional marriage is between a man and a woman, which of course is completely insane considering the fact that if you take any of the Abrahamic religions seriously, you actually are forced to believe that that is sinful. Now, does that mean that you need to hate the people? Of course not. However, Basically, what she's saying is anybody who has a religious affiliation, at least with the Abrahamic religions, should not be appointed as a judge. When she says homophobic, which is a ridiculous misnomer anyways. Nobody's scared of gays. At any rate, though, she says, imagine appointing one of these people because they'd be so terrible and we've already decided that this is not something that we're going to do. Ergo, we should not be appointing anybody who is wanting to take away the right to have an abortion. Which is, an affront, of course, to anybody's political persuasions and an affront to anybody's religious persuasions. It is certainly not in line with the First Amendment of the Constitution of these great United States, which, of course, clearly indicates that we have a right to freedom of speech, to freedom of the press, to freedom of religion, etc. But I don't really think that matters for her because she's a totalitarian scumbag who would like to see you and I and all other people who disagree with her probably thrown behind bars, or bare minimum rendered as useless cogs in society. This is not something that is new. This is something that is actually incredibly common. Virtually everybody who is on the pro-death side of this particular argument thinks that if you are on the pro-life side of this argument, you must be an evil, disgusting, bigoted person who hates women and just wants them to be controlled. They obviously aren't people to you. They're just objects for procreating. Blah, 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 blah. And you shouldn't be trusted with any political positions because we have evolved past your barbaric Neanderthal ways. Fun fact, being called a Neanderthal or being stuck in the 50s constantly is actually what caused me to create that character right there, who is the ACP logo. He's a caveman with 1950s get up. Anyways. And so this is not an uncommon thing. This is the go-to argument for the vast majority of the pro-death crowd. And I point this out because I don't think that this is a rectifiable issue. I don't think that this is something we can ever agree on. Nor is there any reason we should want to find common ground on this issue. The basic fact of the matter is there is nothing, and I mean nothing, no logical persuasion whatsoever, nothing but a direct order from Jesus Christ himself, which could convince me that you people, and by you people I mean the people on the pro-death side, are not evil in this belief. Outright evil, morally abominable. Okay? And the fact that you feel the same way about me proves, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that there is no common ground on this issue. One of these sides has to lose this particular issue. Okay? That's the only way that anything actually gets improved here. Somebody has to lose. Somebody has to be the odd man out in this particular situation. Abortion either has to be recognized as an abhorrent crime against humanity, as a disgusting example of human evil and greed and just narcissism, or it's a simple medical procedure. And there's people out there who are misinformed, misguided, and are wanting to impose their dogmatic, moralistic worldview on others. There is no in-between with those, okay? And if you have any sort of a heart whatsoever, you know exactly which side is correct. I'm obviously going to speak in these blanket terms because this is the only way you can speak about this issue. This is the point that we're at. It's not safe, legal, and rare anymore. It's not within the first 8 weeks anymore. It's not just because of rape, incest, or the threat to mother's life anymore. It's, I want to murder somewhere between 900,000 and 1.1 million babies every single year because I am inconvenienced by the fact that my personal sexual habits have caused me to have a child. That is the problem here, and it's all the way up to the birth of the child, and it's even in some instances, we have heard these maggots say this, it is even in some instances after the child is already born. There is no disputing this any longer. They are pro-death. They are not pro-choice, they are pro-death. And somebody has to lose this fight because it cannot be rectified. There is no middle ground on this issue. And considering the fact that on one side of this issue exists a whole lot of other baggage, such as you can't possibly have a traditional understanding of marriage, we want to censor speech, and all these other kinds of things. I think the people are going to wise up to which side is correct. The problem is I don't think it'll be enough people. I think there will be some sort of like a moralistic awakening, some sort of a conservative awakening, hopefully even some sort of a Christian awakening. I don't think it's going to be big enough to actually cause a change. I could be wrong, but I just don't see it happening. Nonetheless, let's continue. Michael Brown makes some good points. So we're going to listen to him.
That is a Democratic presidential candidate, Kirsten Gillibrand. And she's speaking about pro-life issues. No. That's out. That's out. Because you're taking away someone's rights under the right of a woman to kill the baby in the womb. You're taking away those rights. First, listen to what she says. There's no debate. We're done. We're past that as a society. Or really. So however many Americans, 150, however many millions, tens of millions of Americans are pro-life. No, we're past that. However many say the life of the baby in the womb is precious and important. No, we're past that as a society. What? Notice she also refers to racist, anti-Semitic, and homophobic, meaning that she's equating, saying that I'm going to discriminate against you because of your race. I'm going to discriminate against you and lie about you because you're a Jew. And I don't believe that two men coming together is actually marriage. That now gets all grouped together in her world. But you want to know how radical she is? You want to know how extreme her views are? Do you want to know where the Democratic Party continues to go as it goes towards a pro-death culture? Listen to what she says to further clarify her views.
We believe in this country in the separation of church and state, and I respect the rights of every American to hold their religious beliefs true to themselves. But our country and our Constitution has always demanded that we have a separation of church and state. And all these efforts by President Trump and other ultra-radical conservative judges and justices to impose their faith on Americans is contrary to our Constitution, and that's what this is. And so I believe that for all of these issues, they are not issues that there is a fair other side. There is no moral equivalency when you come to racism.
Okay, so there's a few things that need to be pointed out here. The first thing that I think needs to be pointed out is when she says there is no moral equivalency to racism, she is saying exactly what I'm saying. We're saying the same thing. We're on different sides, and that is the problem here. Okay, there is no moral equivalency. In my mind, there is no moral equivalency in her mind. That is the point that we are at in society today. Okay, the line's drawn. I mean, there's nothing you can do after it's been drawn. It's been drawn, right? Pick a side. There is no middle ground on this issue anymore. However, at any rate, on top of that, notice that she frames this as a church and state issue. If anybody ever tells you that the abortion issue is a church and state issue, laugh at them profusely, because it isn't, and they clearly haven't been listening if they think it is. I think I know one group that actually talks about God in their wanting to, in their rhetoric, in wanting to overturn Roe v. Wade, and that's abolish human abortion, which I certainly support, by the way, because there's nothing wrong with using your convictions religiously to make a moral decision, so long as you can have a secular reason for also having that moral decision made, and as long as you have a secular reason for wanting it to be imposed as law, right? This is famously Anton Scalia's point, and it's a very good point, right? So long as you have a secular reason. Well, there's a pretty clear secular reason here. It's because you don't want babies to die. Crazy. Yeah, I know. Insane that people might not want children to die. It's such a mind-bogglingly, bafflingly primitive concept from them cavemen eras that y'all are just so unfamiliar with because you're up here flying with the Jetsons and your Futurama planes up to your Death Star to go bow to the Emperor in your little futuristic world, where apparently you've evolved past the need to have basic moral values like not killing babies. I don't know. I don't understand the people who seem to think that this is some sort of an issue of moral evolution. It just kind of proves to me that this society is very degraded, morally speaking. But no, this isn't a religious issue. This isn't an issue of church and state. This is an issue of not killing children in the womb. Okay? That is the issue. It has nothing to do with faith in God. It just so happens that most Christians happen to disagree with abortion, which is nothing more than proof positive that my particular worldview is morally superior to yours. And I hate to be perfectly frank about it like that, but at the same time I don't. So, deal with it. It's just not It's not a rational argument. This is not a church and state issue. This is not a First Amendment issue. There is nothing religious in saying you should not kill babies in utero. That is not a religious argument. It is a purely secular argument based in the perfectly reasonable, rational, logical, and moral statement that killing a child in utero is wrong. I think there's another point Michael Brown makes at the end of this, and then we'll move on.
And I do not believe there's a moral equivalency when it comes to changing laws that deny women reproductive freedom.
Oh, okay. So number one, an overt comparison between racists and those who cherish the life of the baby in the womb. Those who say, what about the right of the child in the womb? And remember, the radical laws being passed in different states in America right now allow for abortion right up until the moment of birth. Right up until the moment of birth. In other words, a baby that is totally viable outside the womb. A mother, a doctor can decide there's too much emotional pain and trauma. She has the baby and kill the baby then, rather than deliver the baby and give it up for adoption. There's no moral equivalent. You cannot even think of this morally anymore. She's got the thing completely turned upside down and equates racists with those that say the life of the baby is precious. Unreal. Secondly, when she says, you can't have these church beliefs. Okay, do we recognize who it is that fought against slavery in America? Do we recognize that the anti-segregation movement, where did these things begin? They began in the church, okay? The movement to get rid of segregation, this was a church-based movement. The movement to get rid of slavery, this was church-based, and people had biblical values, and they carried those biblical values over. Separation of church and state means that the state cannot impose a religion on the whole nation, and you will have the Church of America. And separation of church and state means that the state cannot use its might against the church, but it doesn't mean that the church can't have positive influence, positive impact. And in point of fact, you've got liberals running for president, and based on their liberal Christianity or their liberal Judaism in the courts, they have certain viewpoints and worldviews. They've always meshed together. What you cannot do is take your religious view and impose that on everyone.
That's exactly
you
correct.
Can say,
if you guys want to watch the rest of the video, there's about a minute and 20-ish seconds left. You certainly can. I'll have the link to it in the description down below. But I already made my point, and I just wanted you guys to hear his point because I thought it was a good point. Grand blasphemous Pope Francis declares climate emergency and urges action. This is from The Guardian. Addressing energy leaders, Pope warns of catastrophic, terrible, nightmarish, apocalyptic events. Catastrophic effects of global heating. Sorry. I just don't take climate people seriously. I'm sorry. Like at all. Not really sorry, actually. Anyways, Pope Francis has declared a global climate emergency, warning of the dangers of global heating, that a failure to act urgently to reduce greenhouse gases could be a brutal act of injustice toward the poor and future generations. He also endorsed the 1.5 Celsius limit on temperature rises that some countries are now aiming for, referring to warnings from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change of catastrophic effects if we crossed such a threshold. He said, quote, radical energy transition would be needed to stay within that limit, and urged young people and businesses to take a leading role. Future generations stand to inherit a greatly spoiled world. Our children and grandchildren should not have to, this is a quote, by the way, our children and grandchildren should not have to pay the cost of our generation's irresponsibility, end quote, he said in his strongest and most direct intervention yet on the climate crisis. Quote, indeed, as it's becoming increasingly clear, young people are calling for a change, end quote. The Pope's impassioned plea came as he met the leaders of the world's biggest multinational oil companies in the Vatican on Friday to impress upon them the urgency and scale of the challenge and their central role in tackling the emissions crisis. Followed a similar meeting last year, but this time the Pope's stance was tougher as he warned that time was running out and urged them to hear the increasingly desperate cries of the earth and its poor. The chief executives or chairs of BP, ExxonMobil, Shell, Total, ConocoPhillips, Chevron, and several major investors, including BlackRock and Hermes, responded by calling on governments to put in place carbon pricing to encourage low-carbon innovation and called for greater financial transparency to aid investors. However, they made no pledges to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions and set no timetable for action. And of course they didn't, because you see, they want to impose regulations on everybody else. They don't want anything done to themselves because they're greedy. In two statements, which came at the end of a two-day meeting in the Vatican that was addressed by the Pope and led by senior Vatican churchmen, the signatories called for, quote, a combination of policies and carbon pricing mechanisms designed in a way that simultaneously delivers innovation and investment in low-carbon solutions while assisting those least able to pay, end quote. The oil company's pledges did not go far enough, said Mel Evans, climate campaigner for Greenpeace UK. Quote, the oil majors knew all about the risk from climate change many years before most of us first heard about it. They knew where we were heading. They knew that their products were the cause, and yet they kept it quiet and lobbied for business as usual, end quote, said Evans, quote, and they're still lobbying for business as usual. When it comes to saving the planet, they will do what they are forced to do and no more, which is why we're having to block them from drilling new oil wells as we speak. Expecting leadership from them is a path to certain disaster, end quote. Excuse me. Emissions are rising at their fastest level in close to a decade, BP said this week, leaving an ever shorter period to prevent dangerous levels of global heating. Every year of high emissions takes the world closer to the brink because it adds to the stock of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which can take a century to dissipate. Last month, the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere showed the second highest annual increase since continuous records began more than 60 years ago. On Friday, BP served an injunction on the Greenpeace ship Arctic Sunrise to try to prevent its joining the activists occupying the oil company's Reagan Cromarty, Scotland. Greenpeace is trying to highlight the dangers of new oil drilling, which it says will gravely worsen the climate emergency. In previous speeches, the Pope has slammed the continued search for new fossil fuel reserves and said fossil fuels should remain underground. Bob Dudley, chief executive of BP, said after the Vatican meeting, I don't know where the watching came from, after the Vatican meeting, quote, the world needs to take urgent action to get us on a more sustainable path, and it is critical that everyone plays their part, companies and investors, governments and individuals. This requires all of us to come together, build understanding, and collaborate to find solutions. Constructive dialogues such as this meeting are essential in aligning key players on the steps needed to accelerate the energy transition while still enabling advances in human prosperity. I'm grateful to His Holiness for continuing to support this critical engagement. So, of course, they always need to call him His Holiness. At any rate, BP's profits doubled last year to a 5-year high as its output of oil and gas soared. BP's chief economist, I didn't read this part before. BP's chief economist warned this week that the world should not rely on the generosity of the private sector when it came to investing in clean technologies, even though that's the only thing that's ever worked in the past, such as carbon capture and storage, and called for the government to use taxpayer monies to fund such initiatives instead, even though that's never worked in the past. But, who reads history books? That's for nerds. And, people with brains. Excuse me. Mark Campanelli, founder and executive director of the Carbon Tracker, said, quote, we must forego business as usual protocols and short-term market-driven goals or face environmental and financial ruin of catastrophic proportions. Oil and gas companies have a crucial role to play in transitioning to a low-carbon economy, but must today collectively take those hard decisions in the wake of determined investor and public pressure and unambiguous scientific evidence. End quote. The IPCC warned last year that the world had about a decade to bring greenhouse gases under control or face a probable rise in temperatures well beyond the 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial level they warned would bring devastating effects such as droughts, floods, heat waves, and damage to the agriculture. Ladies and gentlemen, it will not happen. It's not going to happen. They are lying to you because they wish to control you. Okay? They wish to control you because they're greedy, power-hungry, narcissistic folk. In the case of the Pope, he actually happens to think that he is the incarnate God, as I have tried to stress with you guys numerous times. There is no reason whatsoever, or as Philip J. Fry would say, there is no raisins whatsoever, why you should be supporting these people. They're liars. They said that we would have no Antarctica by 2014. It's half a decade past 2014. Antarctica's bigger than it once was. I could continue to go on, but I feel like that in and of itself is just a perfect example of how absolutely stupid these people are. It is a dumb, D-U capital B to make it look more dumb. idea to think that human beings are heating up the planet to some sort of level that is going to destroy us all. It's completely ridiculous. It is not backed by any science. Every single prediction they've ever made is wrong. Basic scientific facts, such as how a greenhouse works and how ice melting in a glass of water ends up having the same level, right? Basic scientific facts like that completely disprove them. And yet they continue on with this nonsense, saying we need carbon taxes, we need methane taxes, we need to cut out fossil fuels, and we need to use taxpayer money to build all this crap, and we need to have Green New Deals and all this other kind of nonsense. And it's nothing more to get you under government thumb. That's what it is. Nonetheless, we've hit an hour. So we're going to have an episode on Wednesday. Let me tell you some of the things we're going to be talking about on Wednesday. Sandy Hook lawyers say FBI notified after receiving child porn from Alex Jones. You best believe we're going to be talking about this because there are one of two possibilities going on here. Either number one, the media and deep state is trying to set up Alex Jones, in which case we need to be on our toes because this is coming for others. Or thing number two, Alex Jones is a filthy, stinking pedophile, in which case he needs to have his head cut off. So, which is it? We're not entirely sure, but we're going to read this article next Wednesday, and you guys are going to help us figure out. Another article we're going to read at the very beginning of next Wednesday is this one right here. Either churches self-regulate or state intervenes. From the Daily Nation, people are calling for state intervention in the church. Yes, it is about that time. We've warned you. Others have warned you. It is about that time. Those will be the very first two articles we talk about this Wednesday. Thank you guys for watching this episode here of The Watchdog. If you liked this episode, you can certainly like and share. We definitely appreciate that. Comment any questions, comments, concerns, or criticisms in the comment section below. You will see all of the articles with the exception of the two we did not actually read because those will be on next Wednesday, as well as the videos and the link to ThinkSpot in the comment section below, as well as links to all of our different social media websites, including but not limited to the American Cynic Party on Facebook, Cynic Thought on Instagram. Sorry, it is limited to this. I don't know why I said not limited to. Anyways, the American Cynic Party on Facebook, Cynic Thought on Instagram, Terrestrial Earthbird on Twitter, ACP Official on Gab, or the TheCynicogue on Minds. And of course, you can also subscribe to us here on the TheCynicogue on YouTube. We certainly do appreciate it. We're going to be having a website up here soon. And actually, we're going to be setting up a charity here soon, if any of you guys are interested in that. Though we won't be really name-dropping the charity here too much, just because we don't want to be those people who are constantly asking you for money. However, that is something that is coming up soon, so if you guys are interested, that'll be up. Thank you very much for watching. Shalom. We'll see you Wednesday. Have a good rest of your day. Well, that's weird.